Like when we talk about digital property, there's this unique difference between physical and digital property in that the physical object, it's you have a house, you can't just copy paste the house, but you can copy paste an idea, an image, some digital asset. That's the thing about data. It's very easy to copy and paste. But we still need to protect the original music copyright and whatnot for the reasons you described, right? Intellectual property law needs to incentivize creators to innovate because that technology or artwork can be benefit society as a whole. You need the proper market mechanism for that. Yeah. So I read some of your work, some of your like articles and stuff about digital property rights and stuff. Very great stuff. You mentioned John Locke a lot, right? And there's in modern liberal capitalism, right? One common theory is that property rights supercharge capitalism because once you have property, you have ownership, you have an investment stake, there's incentives to improve, you can trade for mutually beneficial gain, and then all of a sudden economic growth goes whoosh. And that's awesome. And I generally I believe in that as well. But thinking about it, it's not obvious to me how well this translates to the digital space. You mentioned intellectual property law, and yeah, some amount of intellectual property protection encourages innovation, patents, and whatnot. But if you look at it, the protection is actually much weaker compared to the physical world. Like it's your hat, you die, you can destroy the hat and do whatever you want with it. If you write a book, you get it for it was supposed to be 20 years. Disney has changed it to 140 years or whatever, but and I think most people believe
Sure.
that, and you've got all these patent squatters, right? Like these biotech companies who like patent just sequences of DNA, and no one else is allowed to do research on this sequence of DNA. They're not using it, but they just got the patent in it and they're squatting on it. And so I think the general consensus, at least prior to this AI art fiasco, is that intellectual property was far too strong in the US and that companies like Disney or these biotechs were actually abusing intellectual property. And that the economic optimal level of intellectual property protection was lower, like, at least significantly lower than that of physical property. I hear crypto people talk about in a digital property, they just assume it's like physical property. You have it, you keep it. You don't have to pay taxes on it. You don't have to buy insurance on it. You don't have to report it to the government.
So first, when it comes to physical property, the protection is still a legal system. And the legal system, which I would argue blockchain provides a mechanism for that, but take that aside for a moment. If that legal system is overthrown, let's say when a government disappears and a new government appears, actually all that physical land that you appear to have is gone, right? And that's precisely the reason why, my parents left China, because we have this little thing called the Cultural Revolution. And basically land appropriation and all that kind of stuff. And I think this is by the way, the reason why in Asia, things like NFTs and property rights and capitalism is much more alive and well, because in living memory, we have experienced a time when that did not exist at all. South Korea's economy was actually smaller than North Korea, for example. And so this is true for that region. And I would say one of the reasons why in the West, particularly, people dislike NFTs and property rights and so on, partially because capitalism hasn't worked for them. So it's a little bit of that. But I think the other thing also is the fact that I don't think they appreciate what life was like,
Yeah,
without.
no, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I think liberal democracy is great. But the thing I'm questioning is, does the same theory around physical property rights, John Locke, economic growth and all that, apply to digital as obviously?
I think absolutely. But there's a very important thing, because but in the physical property rights, we're not applying sort of some of the provisos that Locke has put in place, right? Which is his famous proviso around essentially sort of your natural property rights is that you need to leave enough and good that is left in common for others. What Locke meant to say, and I think this is the problem we have in the world today, what he meant to say with this was that you can make all the value you want in your land, because back then it was about the labor, not of your mind, but of your hands, right? And you can pluck as many apples as you want from the tree, but you need to leave enough for others as well, because if you don't have use of that tree, then don't monopolize all the trees, so to speak, which is the issue that we have in the physical world around that. So the intellectual property rules are much more closer aligned to that principle, because they have an expiry of the property rights, right? The whole idea is to say, look, you've done all the work and you own that property for 30 years, 50 years, 20 years, whatever the law says, right? And then afterwards, give it to the public domain and you can do something new. And that, I think, is much more in keeping of Locke's idea, because he's saying you can monetize it, but then afterwards it's public good. Like pharmaceuticals would be a good example of this, for instance, right? Like if I can monopolize a certain amount of money that I can make for having spent billions of dollars in research, but after I've made billions of dollars more, or maybe tens of billions more, whatever that ratio might be, I agree that I give it to the public domain.
intellectual property protection is significantly weaker than the physical property protection. Like if I have this bookshelf right here, this doesn't go to the public domain after 50 years, right? This is just mine until it rots or I destroy it or retrade it. So like that 50-year patent window is significantly weaker compared to just traditional physical goods ownership.
Yeah, but it's your shelf. I mean, the shelf in and of itself, if it held you, then it's worth protecting. If it doesn't held you, then it doesn't really matter, right? And
it seems like society believes the optimal level of intellectual property protection is lower than that of physical property protection.
I don't think people believe that. But I think intrinsically people believe that they own their house. I get that because they're in their environment and so forth. However, when it comes to the actual numbers, the most valuable thing is intellectual property rights. And the companies are pursuing and trying to protect and extend the intellectual property rights